Yeah.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you!
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
My mic is muted. I'm Daniel DeBona.
Let's take that back.
Hey,
Good
yes.
evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
That was so much smoother.
Hey.
And David, and we are here this evening to talk about a very special movie to both of us because
Yes.
this is the first time, Daniel, that we are coming into something as virgins together.
Yes, 4 fresh eyes on a movie for the first time since we've been doing this.
Or 8. Since we are both bespectacled horror fanatics here.
Yes.
So this was fantastic. This was your idea.
Yes, I've this was a movie that I it was something I wanted to see a while back when it came out, and then just never got around to it. And then since we've been doing the podcast, like Netflix recommended it, I was like, oh my god, I'd never seen it. That's what I'm going to recommend next when I get a shot.
Yeah, I in fact bought this right when it came out.
Oh,
And had not had a chance to go back and watch it. I've been a big fan of Guillermo del Toro for just about as long as I've known about Guillermo del Toro. So I saw Pan's Labyrinth and I was like, fuck, this guy's a fucking master.
yeah. Like I don't know if it was Pan's Labyrinth or Hellboy for me, where I was like, yes, okay, yes,
Yeah. Actually, I don't know which one came first. They're both right around that time.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I realized that he also directed Blade 2 after the fact.
I honest to God, I don't think I ever realized that until right now.
Yeah, which in my opinion is the superior Blade.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
So much better.
Yeah. And he's got such an aesthetic. Like he's got a style all his own. Everything feels like a dark fantasy.
Yeah.
Like those old Grimm's fairy tales,
Okay,
where
yeah, I can see that.
yeah, where it's clearly fantasy, but like there's a sense of terror here. Like
Yes.
you should be afraid because your life is in danger. And then at the end of the story, maybe you live. I mean, probably the witch is gonna die, but maybe you get cooked in an oven. That sort of thing. So yeah, I've been looking forward to this. I'm glad that you sat me down and said, here, no Conjuring until we watch Crimson Peak.
If you're here for The Conjuring, we're slightly sad, but really we're laughing at the fact that we're disappointing you again.
We're never gonna do it.
No, never.
So, to my knowledge, and I know that there's maybe 1 or 2 of Del Toro's movies that I haven't seen, but this is the first time that he does. For sure, I know this is the first time he does gothic
Yes.
horror. Although I think to call it straight horror is a
I mean,
is doing the movie a disservice
there
because
we
it's
go.
so much more.
It's underselling it.
Yeah, it's underselling it. But I think it's the first time he's also done ghosts.
I was trying to think about that as I was watching this, and we're going to get to talking about the ghosts a little bit later. But as I was just enthralled with the way that the ghosts looked, I was trying to remember. I was like, I'm going back through like Guillermo del Toro creatures, and I was like, okay, yeah, no, there's a guy with the eyeballs in his hands, right? But ghosts,
yeah.
I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I don't think he has. and I never saw this one that everyone always sings its praises. So I do need to get around to it, called Devil's Backbone.
I never saw Devil's Backbone either, actually.
So I
Put it
don't
on the
know if
list.
I don't know if that is a ghost story. I know it has to do with the Spanish Civil War. So interesting, right? But I really enjoyed this as a fan of. We've talked about this before. I'm a big fan of Universal monster movies. I'm a fan of the Hammer horror movies.
Yes.
Particularly those that lean really heavily into that gothic horror. I love movies that this clearly leaned into, movies like The Innocents, movies like The Haunting.
Yes.
I'm really into that sort of stuff. So as a sort of gothic ghost story, how do you think this worked?
So I think there's a lot of things about this that work so well. I think that when when you're looking at the pacing, I think that's that leans very heavily into that idea of this gothic hammer horror film. The period piece, obviously, that fits that genre just perfectly. And as opposed to when we did Candyman and we were looking at like a new age gothic, this was a very classical approach to gothic. Like, we're going to put you in a house that is dilapidated. Like, that house itself always looks like it's bleeding. So there's always this imminent feeling of death. And then and where you're always going to wonder what's just around the corner, right? So you get this really great vibe out of so much of what's going on, just with the setting. We talked back when we did The Shining, we talked about how the Overlook became a character in the movie.
Yes.
I wouldn't say as much that the house in this one, Ardell Estate, is a character, but but I wouldn't say it's a character, but it's like a living, breathing setting. Just because of the things that are going on in it, and that is where you start to get that gothic feel from.
I am totally in agreement. I think that there is so much about this that works. I'm a fan of gothic fiction. Frankenstein is one of my favorite novels. Edgar Allan Poe is one of my favorite writers. And I think that there's a lot here that Del Toro pulled from as a not so subtle nod,
yes,
to these things, and said, like, hey, listen, this is what we're doing. There's no sort of trying to disguise what this movie is. It is a gothic love story. It is a gothic ghost story, and I for one think it really works. As I was watching it last night, I was unsure how I felt about it. I was like, well, this is kind of like a rehash of many different gothic horror movies that I've seen before. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, man, there's so many layers to this. And you keep pulling these things back. And I started thinking about this. I'm like, fuck, this movie just wouldn't let me go. I kept thinking about it well after I should have gone to bed.
Right.
Partly because these ghosts were legit scary.
Yes.
And then today at work, I found myself thinking about it too. And anytime I had, I had a moment, I would stop and read up on it. Just before we sat down to record, I was watching some of the special features on the Blu-ray, and there's some really, really good stuff in there. So I think overall this movie works particularly well.
Yeah, and outside of the idea of just this gothic horror, I think that it does an amazing job telling what ends up being a horribly twisted love story.
Yeah.
But it really does a great job as a romance film too. It was funny because going into this movie, literally the only frame of reference I had, and this is a movie I've never heard. I mean, like, I know it was a big time release, but it's not one that I ever hear just pop up in conversation. The only frame of reference I had for this was my parents went and saw it in theaters, and my dad hated it. And my mom was like, it wasn't what we thought it was going to be. So I went back on YouTube and I watched some of the trailers that they did, and they promoted this movie as a straightforward horror film. So
Yes.
I can see why a lot of people would have been disappointed watching it the first time through, because I like, obviously it has horror elements, and it fits here with our podcast. But I mean, it was a weird and twisted romance at it, at its core, as so much. And so even not just as a gothic horror, as this gothic romance telling, like a Love in the Time of Cholera type thing, like where it's just well, look, these people who are absolutely at their end, but look at how they can find each other, and look at how, whatever roadblocks end up in their way, they end up kind of overcoming them in some horribly weird ways, but they do end up kind of, like finding love. The hoops and the loops that they go through to get there are awkward, but even aside from just being a gothic horror, it works very well as a gothic romance as well.
Yeah, I think that a good horror movie has many elements to it. Unless you're watching something like a slasher movie where you're kind of just, it's popcorn fare,
right?
A good monster movie, a good ghost story. There's got to be something there, because otherwise, there's only so many ways that you can scare me.
Yes,
and I think the true horror in this movie lies not with the ghosts, but in the past, in what these ghosts help us unlock.
Yes,
as it were, the abuse suffered by the Sharps, the absolute like horror of the relationship.
Oh my gosh! What a fucking reveal!
yeah, and I thought there was something there, and yet I still was not prepared for it.
Well, and that so early on when he hires the detective, who, by the way, it was driving me insane before I realized that he was the guy from Torchwood. Not Torchwood. That Doctor Who spinoff show that is completely escaping my mind right now. But the guy who played Mr. Holly, the private investigator.
Yeah, what was it? Not Torchwood?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, it is Torchwood. There we go. Okay,
yeah, with Captain Jack.
Yes, yeah, with Captain Jack, and it drove me insane before it finally clicked for me that Mr. Holly was the guy from Torchwood. And then I ended up looking. I was like, oh yeah, he's in like everything. Like that's just why he looks so familiar. He's just constantly there. But when Mr. Holly finds the document and they show it to the father, and then he's like, oh my God, okay, well then and he breaks up their relationship and everything, and I was like, oh okay, I bet that's not really his sister. I bet it's his wife, and
that's what I thought.
You get the feeling, that you've always got the feeling it's a con from the funeral on. Mm-hmm. You always have the idea that it's some sort of con, but then to find out that it's like, well, it is his wife, but also it's his sister, and it was like, wait, what? Yeah, like I was ready for the first left turn there. Like that was not surprising. That's what we saw coming. You did a full U-turn on me here. Like I was not ready to completely 180 and be like, oh no, it is his sister and his wife. Like we've been telling you the truth, but also hiding the thing that you kind of knew was coming.
It's it's a brilliant turn. Which reminded me somewhat of Chinatown, that scene where Jake Gittes is slapping her, and she goes, she's my daughter, she's my sister, she's my daughter, she's my sister. It was that sort of like, what exactly is going on here right now? There's that scene is so brilliantly shot because, for starters, it's not an overly explicit scene,
right?
But it implies everything, right?
Yeah, well, she just says, I wish I could remember exactly what she says, but she says something like, "You're not really his sister, you're his wife," and she's like, "Oh, hunt, essentially like the period British version of, "Oh, honey, but I'm also his sister."
Yeah, so there's that initial betrayal of, because Loki's face is totally like in focus, and you can tell who this is, but she doesn't know who the woman is.
Right.
And there's, she's not obviously going to think that his sister's going to be there.
Right.
In the process of giving him a hand job, right? And then she turns her, and it was so clearly staged. They wanted
Yes.
her to see this,
I mean, down to the fact that they were singing loud enough that she was singing loud enough that she wanted it to echo through the house. She wanted her to come find them in this embrace.
Yeah. There's so many layers here.
And what's crazy about that scene? So she walks in and they're they're there and she's giving him a hand job and she's singing, and like that scene when you remove the incest angle is really sweet. Right? Like you could see that being in some sort of movie about like a guy who just returned home from war and like that's what he pays hookers to do, right? Is like cuddle him and sing in his ear and just maybe jerk him off. But so at first you're like, oh man, and then it's like, oh God, that's his sister. This is getting so weird.
Yeah. Oh boy.
So we're talking about how you started off and you were referencing being a fan of Hammer horror and some things like that, and so we've talked about a lot of what Guillermo del Toro has done to put his spin on Gothic, but I think it's really important for us to acknowledge what he does that's not necessarily his spin. Like what type of things did you notice that are trope might be the wrong word because it's not something that you see all the time, but like the staples of being gothic or other films that he pulled inspiration from.
For me, and I'm so glad you worded it this way, and we didn't talk about this before, so I love that you kind of set it up this way.
Thank you.
The moment she arrives at Crimson Peak, and you're seeing soot, leaves, snow, something falling through the foyer. Like, yes. What exactly is going on here? And then he goes on to explain the state of this house. All right. Over the course of the movie, the house becomes more and more dilapidated.
Yes.
Right. Where the clay starts to seep through the walls. It's not just coming up through the floors.
And the clay in the walls, like just mwah. Oh,
yeah, it's so perfect. And there's such a disjointed look to everything. It's like this was purchased in this period of time, and this was purchased in this period of time, and nothing has been touched. And what immediately came to mind was the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher.
Yes.
And in so many ways, I feel like this story is an homage to The Fall of the House of Usher, because in The Fall of the House of Usher, Roderick Usher and his sister are tied to the physical house in a supernatural way. And the relationship that they share is definitely not a natural one. It's hinted that there might be something incestuous there, but we're not exactly sure what it is, right? We do know that as Roderick's health declines, so too does the state of the house. And the narrator's not there for that long a period of time.
Right.
So over the few months that Edith stays at Crimson Peak, we see this happen. And all I could think of was, what a brilliant way to tip your hat to, who is, one of the undisputed masters of Gothic fiction, and do so in a not so subtle way that does not influence plot, but influences character development and set design, so that the audience who is in on this is like, oh man, that's so cool.
Right.
I get what's going on here. And those that don't have to stop and say, well, hang on a second, I don't get this.
Okay.
You know, to me that was such a brilliant thing to do, and it was done so well. It was done absolutely beautifully. The house itself is a masterpiece of set design.
Yes.
Del Toro says that there's always hallways where the ghosts appear. Says I think the only time the only time you see a ghost appear, no, there's two instances in which you don't see a ghost appear in a hallway. One is on the hill,
right,
when she's pointing, and the other time is in the stairwell.
Yeah, there's the one. It's just like floating in like the open spot in the middle of the house.
But in every other instance, the ghosts manifest in hallways, be it her mother at the beginning of the movie, or the numerous ghosts that are in Crimson Peak. And there's that one hallway with the wooden arches.
Yes.
In the Crimson Peak home. And he says that the hallway was built specifically for it to not look right. Says it's just a little too short and a little too narrow. He says it was really designed so that your focus goes 100% to the ghost or to Edith, and that there are many those pillars that hold them up. They're exactly the same, and they're repeated so often that the camera cannot focus. And so everything is just out of focus, giving it this like almost dreamlike quality, which is such a staple of Del Toro's work.
Right. Yeah. And we talk about the setting, and that's something that you can always fall back on when it comes to a Del Toro movie is the sheer attention to detail that goes into every little bit of a town. Or, we talked about Pan's Labyrinth earlier. You go back and you watch that scene where they're in the dining hall with the eyeball monster hand. What
a great scene.
But I mean, just the amount of detail and the way that that's all set up, and that very much carries over into this, that sets this amazing setting. When I was watching it, and so I had this idea, because it's promoted. We keep using that word gothic, but it's because this is probably the truest thing to use that word in a very long time. So there are certain things I'm watching for, and there were certain things that I kind of geeked out about it that I liked a lot. But probably the simplest thing that I feel like was, it was an overt homage. Absolute love letter to the genre. Is early in the film, there are a couple times where they do like those keyhole like wipes where where it shrinks in and gets real small. And it's like all of a sudden you're watching an old Universal monster movie. You're watching Bela Lugosi's Dracula, and they just close everything into the one tight circle, then open it back up, and the scene has changed. I geeked out so hard for that, and it's such a simple thing that if you're not familiar with the genre, or you might not even think anything of it. You might go, that's kind of weird. I don't know that I've ever seen that before. It's an odd choice. But when you understand the reason that he did it, it's so cool. And it really drives home that idea that this is about doing something that he grew up loving and doing it well. There are some other little things like that that reminded me of some of the older movies, but that one, it just really, really stuck out. I loved the way that when they were in the town, when they had to go to the depot or whatever to pick up
the post office,
the post office, and they ended up staying the night there. Like the entire way that was lit and everything looked was completely different than the house, but not just in architecture. Like the coloring was different, and so that really
it's very natural tones.
Yes,
yeah,
and that really sold the idea of how important and how weird this house was. Like you at the beginning of the movie, everything's kind of naturally colored, and then they go to the estate, and everything's weird. And it always feels weird, not just because there's a giant hole in the ceiling and the elements are constantly falling in, but it's always weird. And so, but then you get into that place where that's where it's been for so long, it stops feeling weird and you get comfortable with it. So then they give you one scene where he takes her out because she needs some air. And then not only does she get some air and get a chance to clear her head, but then we're reminded of the fact that house isn't reality. It's its own reality. It's its own thing. This is what the real world looks like. Remember this from the beginning of the movie? Like, this is what it looks like to light something with a candle. And so when there's a scene, one of the things, just a picturesque example of things of being classic, the look of the candelabras that they were always carrying, that she was always carrying around.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because the movie is clearly not lit by natural light. This isn't Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, right? But there is such a like a painterly aesthetic to the beginning of the movie with all of the candelabras, the candles, the chandeliers, and then when we move to the Allerdale estate, all we really have is like that one candelabra that she takes, around with her. Yeah, and the lighting around her is so natural,
right?
But everything outside of, like, the 3 lumen that thing generates is just it's all very, very dark. It's lots of blues and lots of greens, and these aren't natural colors. These are colors that we typically associate with something a little more supernatural. If you're watching live, which if you're not, why the hell are you not? You should be watching live with us. Don't just listen to the podcast. Watch it live on YouTube or Facebook.
Comment and we'll talk to you.
Yes, we see this here in front of us with the actual home in this sort of like unnatural blue.
Yes. Oh yeah, no. I mean, there's a scene. Oh, sorry, the dog is pouncing on me. There's I don't know what he needs. There's a scene.
Speaking of,
yes,
that dog.
My dog.
No. Your dog's great. That dog. What does she name it? She names it something very normal.
Yeah, I don't even remember.
I can't remember the name of that dog. But man, that moment when she's playing fetch with the dog, and she's with the dog, and that ball comes rolling in the
like,
bathroom.
Where's the ball? And then it comes flying into the room. Yeah.
But I was like, nope. I'm out of here.
There's a scene where she's startled awake and she's hearing all these horrible noises, and she gets up and she grabs, the one candelabra, the one that she takes everywhere with her, and she falls and it goes out. And then we're really bathed in how the eerie glow that is the house. Obviously it's a movie, and they're not selling us on the lights go out so you can't see anything. But they made you very aware of the fact that it didn't feel weird. It didn't feel like you should be in the dark. It was like, wow, this house kind of glows blue. Like, that's so strange, but it fits. It makes sense for what was going on. But then when she finally goes down into the mines for the first time, and she gets down there, then we are assaulted with another color palette, where there are these bright pinks, and it's almost as if that elevator doesn't just go down into the mine. It's like a portal, and it's a very stark reminder of the fact that yes, the house is falling apart and all of that, but this secret that's buried underneath is so important. Like, they wanted to make sure you didn't just view it as another part of the house, that you were to, it was like walking into Frankenstein's laboratory.
Frankenstein.
I did. Yeah, I sure as hell did. I was like walking into Frankenstein's laboratory. I mean, you've got what is, this dilapidated house, but then you got down there and everything was clean. and like I said, and it was bright, even though it was underground, and the color palette is all very new and very different. And again, you're reminded of how weird everything looked in the house. Every time you got away from it, it served as a reminder of how weird the house was.
Yeah, there's this sense that not insofar as like The Shining, where the layout of the actual hotel does not make sense, right? And maybe not even insofar as like The Haunting of Hill House, where there are rooms that seem to appear and disappear and stuff like that. But there is a sense that the layout of the house doesn't quite make sense. Like there are wings to this house that we never see. There are so many keys, and yet they don't visit these parts of the house. But what is really falling apart is the center of this house.
Right.
And then you mentioned that the mine is underneath the house, and yet we see the light shining in, right? Where the mine should be is like directly underneath the kitchen, the living room. Like there should be no place for light here.
Right.
And it's not like it starts underneath the house and goes under open land or something like that. There is no physical way for this to be happening.
Yeah.
So
it's so weird, just the way that she gets down there, like I said, and just and you see it, and like you're right, it seems like something that shouldn't exist, but it's not presented in a way like some of those other things where you're reminded that it shouldn't exist. They just leave you with this eerie, uncomfortable feeling that it shouldn't be able to be there.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
eerie's the right way, I think, to describe it.
And there's a couple other things that you get to here, where you're looking at, when you're looking at, like I said, like your Gothic type tropes, this love story that seems like it should never be, but they're gonna fight against all odds. The guy down on his luck, but he comes from a family that was of means, falling in love with the girl who is still of means, things like that. The whole flowers in the attic aesthetic, not so much a throwback, but also it has a place where you're like, hey, wait, I know a story about kids that spent all their time in the attic and fell in love with each other.
Yeah, there definitely was that throwback there. Yeah.
And so you get a lot of these things in it that, these two topics kind of running together. You can tell so often when we do these, when we do this podcast and we're talking about things, or just when you're talking about anything with anybody, the things that end up being good are the things that you can tell come from a place of love. And you watch this movie and you know that Guillermo del Toro absolutely loves his inspiration. I won't say source material, but his inspiration. You can tell that he loves all of that, and he wanted to bring it back to the forefront. There was a very brief time, I think it was a little bit before this movie came out, when The Woman in Black came out, and there was this idea that maybe Hammer horror was something the world was ready for again. And then it was like, oh, well, maybe you should have, led with a better foot forward than The Woman in Black. But there was this idea that there was this classic version of horror that was different from what we were getting, because these were coming out right around the time when horror had just started to become the gore fest. We were getting into things that I don't even really consider horror anymore, but people were calling them scary movies, like Hostel. I love Hostel, but I don't consider it's not a horror movie. It's a gore.
It's torture porn.
And so it was, there was this very brief time. Now, horror has taken a good turn, and we've talked about some of that stuff now, but there was this very brief time where it was like, maybe this is the future of horror, is going back. and remembering what made it great. And maybe there's an audience out there like you and I who fell in love with this stuff as a child, and that we can stir that while making it feel fresh.
And one of the things that Del Toro talks about frequently is that when he makes his horror movies, or at the very least movies that have horror elements to them, he uses himself as the sort of guinea pig. And he says that he imagines that if something scares him, it will scare others.
I would imagine that anything that scares Guillermo del Toro is going to scare a whole lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's as a filmmaker, you have to, as an artist, you have to kind of say, does this do anything for me? Right. And to kind of transition into the next topic here, which is the ghosts themselves, ghost aspect of the story. He chose something that clearly scares him. I thought the ghosts were terrifying in this movie. Yes. What do you think here?
So from the very first time that we see a ghost, the movie opens and it immediately makes you aware of the fact that there are going to be ghosts here. It's like the first monologue, right? Mm-hmm. And so the first time that we see the ghost, we see the ghost of this little girl's dead mother. And before you even see the ghost, you get this incredible silhouette at the end of a hallway, and it does the very Nosferatu.
The long fingers.
The silhouette of the long fingers and stuff like that. And she's kind of trying to hide, and you're not sure if you're actually going to see it or anything. And then you get this incredible ghastly figure. But maybe ghastly's not the right. It's not grotesque. So I'm going to stick with ghastly because it's not grotesque, but it is horrifying. And so not only does it come down the hall at this little girl and she realizes it's her mother, but truly like a child who has been scared, she just rolls over, out of sight, out of mind, you know, like the blanket will protect me type thing. And this ghost gets into bed with her, wraps its hand around her and starts whispering. And it set this amazing tone for what could be expected from ghosts in this movie. And from then on, they just got more and more frightening and weirder and weirder. The first time that she's in the bathtub and we see the red one, well, I guess it's the second time we see the red one because she kind of sees it in the elevator. Yeah. But the movement of it is so it's so
stilted
and weird.
Yeah.
Stilted. Yeah, it's so weird. I think they did a great job of not reinventing the wheel. The idea of the ghost is the idea of a ghost, but these were definitely Crimson Peak ghosts. There's nothing offhand that I'm directly going to compare the visual of these ghosts to. The closest thing I could come to was there were certain moments where the way the ghost moves and the way that I saw the ghost, it reminded me of Peter Jackson's Frighteners. Every once in a while, I got a couple of Frighteners vibes, but for the most part, that is a ghost that I can 100% associate with this movie and not expect to see anywhere else.
This was such a unique take on ghosts. You mentioned something that at first I found terrifying, and once we come to know what these ghosts want, to me makes a hell of a lot of sense, which is that her ghost mother crawls into bed with her and wraps her arms around her. Now, I can't think of anything scarier than a ghost climbing into bed with you, and it's ghastly fingers like wrapping itself around your arm. Like that is just I've in fact had nightmares about this.
Yeah, at least when a ghost got into bed with Ray Stantz, it gave him a BJ.
Oh boy, I completely forgot about that scene. Every time I watch that movie, I forget that scene's coming up.
Yeah, me too. I like a couple summer, I say a couple summers ago. Time is a flat circle. A while back when the female led Ghostbusters was coming out, and so my oldest son wanted to watch Ghostbusters. We're watching. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a great kids movie, and then it gets to that part, and I was like, why do I
Is
always
it?
forget that this scene
Yeah.
exists?
Yeah. It's probably for a reason. It doesn't serve a purpose. I love Ghostbusters, but the scene should have been cut. Should have been left on the cutting room floor. When we find out that these ghosts all have good intentions and that they are in fact reaching out to Edith, because Edith is one of the few people who can actually see them.
Yes.
Right. And interact with them. We understand why her ghost mother got into bed with her, because this is what a mother does to to calm her child, right? She's grieving, right? She's lost her mother, and because for those that have passed, time means nothing. This warning about Crimson Peak is coming now.
Right.
And so she's getting into bed with her to make her feel better, and is telling her, beware Crimson Peak, right? That moment of realization, like, we know it as the audience. Right. Like, okay, we know that there's something fucked up happening in this place, and they haven't said Crimson Peak yet, but we know it's going to be said, and when it is, it's the aha moment.
He
right?
said the thing.
Yeah, he said the thing. But for her, it is such a terrifying moment, such an absolutely terrifying moment, and she realizes right then that these ghosts don't mean any harm.
Right. And there's a comment that you made in there that I love, and that's something that's one of my favorite things when discussing the supernatural and this idea of like all realities existing, kind of like overhead sheets that you lay one on top of the other, and depending on where you are, you can see down what's below you. And so this idea that that a spiritual energy that still exists, that time is meaningless, it presents this really fascinating idea, because that my first thought was like, okay, she's a kid, and I know that whatever Crimson Peak is going to be when she's grown. Like, how does this ghost know this? And so it takes this idea that time only exists because of our place in it. And when you're removed from that particular area of where you are, and you are moved to a slightly different plane where time doesn't exist or exists differently, so you're seeing the past, present, and future like all at one time type thing. So it's that idea of a ghost. You watch a show like Supernatural, and a ghost is really just presented as the idea of like something awful happened to them, so they're stuck in this place in time. But this idea of a ghost being a portent of the future, and being able to give warnings. It's one of the reasons I'm obsessed with the idea of Mothman, because just this idea that something could love a person or a group of people so much that it is aware of what's going to happen, and it's using all of its energy, because you've got to assume that, and I don't know, that this is headcanon, I guess, for me, about ghosts, but you've got to assume that the reason we don't see ghosts all the time, if they exist, is because they have to expel a certain amount of energy to exist on this plane, to come through the veil. And so the idea of a ghostly mother or a wronged woman using the energy they have to warn someone about something that's going to happen to them, because I also tend to think of this idea that it's like an energy bar in Mega Man, and it's going to run out. So if there is any conscious thought into this, which they're taking the time to warn, this idea that they would burn such a chunk of this energy they have to exist at all to warn someone is fascinating to me.
We get a sense that might be the to use your word, the canon of Crimson Peak, because these ghosts appear, they have a very brief message to give, and then they make their way back down into the clay pit.
Right.
And they stay there until the next apparition. So it is entirely possible that is what they were going for here. That there is this tremendous amount of energy, and we always see them, with the exception of which one is that? Is it the Italian woman?
The one who's floating in the stairwell?
Yeah. She never says a word. But the other ones, they're always like in extreme agony, extreme pain. And that comes out, there's a lot of energy that needs to be put forth for them to be there.
And when you look at the fact that the first time she sees her mother, it was right after her mother's funeral, that ghost moves much more smoothly and is much more defined in what it is. That first shot of the mother ghost, there's very obviously like some sort of like black gown, you assume kind of what she was buried in. You can see ribs and things like that. And she moves very smoothly through that hallway. But then as you get to the ghosts later on that are trying to give these warnings, they're fighting to get up through the floor. They're moving. We talked about how she moves like she's in agony. It's very stilted. Everything they're doing, it's so stressful to their being that you get this idea that they're tired. They're trying to keep this from happening again, but it just keeps happening.
There's also another differentiating factor in the ghosts, which I picked up on right away, and it took me a little while to figure out what to decode it. I think I have. The English teacher in me is trying to look at the symbolism here, and I think I have it. So the ghosts are different colors, right? All of the ghosts that are killed in Crimson Peak are red, right? They are thrown into these clay pits, right? The red could be the clay just dripping off of them, right? But they were also murdered violently, right? And red is anger, red is aggression, right? Red is that violence. It's that act of murder. Whether it was a a cleaver to the head, which is fucking brutal,
and it's still just sitting there, like if you just see it.
Whether it's a cleaver to the head, or whether it's poison to the stomach, you are getting it somehow, right?
Yeah.
And so therefore they are red, right? Thomas is white.
Yes.
Right. And I was like, well, why would Thomas be white? He was complicit in what was going on. But there's a change that happens in Thomas when he spends the night with Edith. You can tell that he is genuinely falling in love with her, I think. And there's that sense of betrayal when he tells Lucille, we can leave this place behind. We'll all go somewhere, anywhere. And she says, we,
yes.
And she understands that, for him, there is no life without Edith now. He truly was trying to find a way to save her.
Yeah.
And to find a way to save Dr. Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah, I was going to say Jax from Sons of Anarchy. That's
I forgot his name. Alan. It was Alan, right?
Yes.
So, he even tells him, like, you're the doctor. Tell me where to stab. So he's making these moves. He may not be redeemed because he's still a ghost at the end, right? But he's white. He appears just long enough to make a difference and save Edith's life.
Right.
and then he disappears. He's gone. So it's a very different kind of ghostly apparition than the ones that were murdered and tossed in the clay pits, right? He had sort of made his peace with what was going on, right? But then that still leaves two black ghosts, the mother
Right.
and Lucille. I'm like, well, how can they both be black? What's going on here? What I came up with was that they were both rotted, where one was rotted physically
From disease.
by disease. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
black cholera. I
black
think?
cholera. Yeah, the other one was rotted on the inside.
Ah.
And so there was like where one did not have a choice to have her body physically rot, the other one didn't have a choice to have her spirit rot.
Okay.
And that sort of the abuse at the hands of their mother turned her into this thing, this rotting thing, where the only solace she could seek was in this incestuous relationship with her brother, because their father was always traveling. Right. He mentions that Thomas mentions their father was always traveling. They had to pay for the things in the house somehow. So to me, that's why they are both black. Is they're both victims. One a victim of disease, the other a victim of abuse, although she is an abuser herself.
Right.
So there's that, the sort of victim aspect of it, where there is a rot that was brought into her, but she amplified it.
Okay, I can see where you're going with that, because I was thinking the same type of thing about the mother ghost being black because of the disease, but then I couldn't find, as you started talking about the colors, but I couldn't find a way to link it to the sister being Lucille being the ghost at the end, stuck forever playing piano
Right.
in the house. And so I like that. I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. And it's, we talked about on this one when we talked about Death of the Author, when we were doing Sleepaway Camp, right? Like whether or not that was the intention, the fact that there's enough there for you to pick up those pieces and put it together, I think makes it a very valid argument.
Yeah, I think so too. And then there's also the fact that, to go back to Gothic cinema, have you ever seen The Mask of the Red Death, the Roger Corman film? So the way that the Red Death is presented there looks eerily similar to the way that some of these ghosts are presented here. So we have not only the House of Usher, as it were, but we also have this Red Death figure, multiples of it that appear, and they're warnings. It's all about the past. And Edith says it herself at the very beginning of the movie. It's not a ghost story. It's a story that happens to have ghosts in it.
Right. And Loki makes he references how where he's from, ghosts are not something to just be taken lightly. And so the idea of there being symbolism in the way that the ghosts look and move all tracks.
Yeah.
So we're talking. So as we're talking about the fact that some of the ghosts are different colors, what we get to in this movie is that everyone in some shape or form really in this movie is a victim to something. But even with that, at its core, we talk so much about the horror elements of this movie. This is a horror movie podcast, but when it really comes down to it, it's a romance movie. There's very obvious love stories, whether they work or don't work, or if they're twisted. But what we have here is a love story. So when you look at those elements and the way that the relationships are presented, how do you think that the movie works as a love story?
I think that it works best as a love story. And I think the best love story in it is the love not between Thomas or Edith or even Thomas and Lucille, but the love that Thomas and Lucille have for the house.
Oh,
Neither is willing to leave this house, really, right? How much money has Thomas sunk into this contraption, which clearly does not work?
right.
Right? That invention of his has doomed them, you know. And as he travels from city to city, country to country, trying to gather the funds for this invention that will not work, he is forced to continue to partake in this sort of sinister act of seducing these women, marrying them, stealing their money, and continuing this incestuous relationship with Lucille. But it's all a means to an end, and the end is the sharp home. Right? We hear about this almost right from the very beginning when Edith runs into Alan and he says, "Oh, well, my family just came back from England. They're talking to some baronet who's a baronet." Right. And she explained, she was like, a baronet is someone who lives off the land, someone who exploits the land, exploits the workers, right? Their love for each other is trumped only by the love of this land. They can't let it go. So much so that all of their sins, the things that they do, the naughty things that they do, they hide in the land. They throw it into the clay. And when the clay comes out and it starts to haunt them, right? Well, they leave. They go find someone else to do this to and start over again, because that they can't let go of this land. To me, that was the best love story in here, because there is incest in there, so you kind of have to accept that there is a facet of this that is wrong, right? But there's also something to it that is unconventional and quite gothic, right? In the same way where Dracula is tied to his land. He must take the dirt from Transylvania with him to England, right? The way that Frankenstein is tied to his land, right? Even young Frankenstein, Frankenstein comes back to his land. Ultimately, that gothic stories have to be about the home. It has to be about the land, because it's atmospheric. It has to go back to that somehow. But there's another love story I also really, really liked, and it's also go ahead.
Before I just want to say, I've been doing podcasts with you for a while now. We've been friends for a good long time. Honest to God, I think this is the best take like I've ever heard you have on anything. That was an incredible breakdown.
Oh, thank you.
Like that just blew me away. Like it never. It was not a thought that ever crossed my mind. And like, by the time like you finish it up, like I'm so on board with how amazing that is. Like I am now to the point where I'm like, I got a point or two, but I'll get to him eventually. Like that was so good, because I didn't even think about it like that. Like this idea that all of this being terrible and being with your sister and all of these horrible things that they've had to do. We got a comment from Andy here. Yeah. Andy says that we should tag team and teach this podcast as an online college course. Great job. Thank you, Andy. But this idea that all of that it doesn't just boil down to his love for his sister or that they want to get rich again, but it's all because of the love they have for this house. Is that is far and away the most incredible take possible for this. I
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Do you want to go into one of your points before I get to my other one?
Yeah, sure. So, while we're talking, obviously, we're talking about the people in their house. So it's with the obvious. There's two obvious choices here when you're talking about the romance and the love. But one, though, the way I was going to go with it being an unconventional kind of take was this the love, whether it be romantic or platonic, you're never 100% sure, between Edith and Dr. McMichael. You always kind of get the idea that he may be romantically interested in her, but also that that's her dad's physician and their family seem to go way back. But this concept that he loved her so much that she moved literally across an ocean, and he solved a cold case murder to save her. This idea, everybody else in the town is like, well, he was old and he slipped on the water and hit his head on the sink. Time to move on. And he was like, really, his head was bashed in pretty brutally, and he stuck with it. And then he literally crossed oceans to save this girl. And he shows up at the post office, and they're like, it's storming, your horse can't be out there. He's like, fuck y'all, I'll walk. They're like, it's 4 hours. And he goes, I better get going. This idea that
it reminded me of that scene in in Empire Strikes Back, where the one rebel pilot keeps telling Han Solo that he can't go out and look for Luke Skywalker, right? And he's like, your tauntaun will freeze to death. He goes, well, I'll see you in hell.
Yeah, exactly. Just this concept that even if he didn't have any romantic inclinations, this was somebody that he knew and that he loved, and he didn't want to see anything bad happen to them. And so, he's doing everything he can. He even immediately plays into their game. They're like, oh, she fell and she's injured. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I'll take care of her because I believe you. And he's going along with everything. And just to try to save her life is a great is a great idea to kind of twist this, romance. Yes, it's a romance movie, but also there is a love story there, even if it is platonic or brotherly. There's this idea of protecting somebody that you love, even if it involves crossing an ocean and walking for 4 hours in the snow.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I thought that was a great love story. Charlie Hunnam was great in that role.
He was.
Yeah, he
look weird without a beard. Also, yes, but whatever.
Yes, also yes. I mean, even as fucking King Arthur, he had a beard.
Yeah.
And he was great in that. Yeah, he's one of these actors I think is often overlooked. But there's a subtlety to his acting and nuance to it, and I think he always does a great job. He did a great job here. I hope they end up together.
Yes, me too. I like to think that they do.
Yeah, this movie doesn't need a sequel, but I would like, somewhere in the back of my mind, they're together.
Right. Write me like a 3-chapter epilogue.
Yeah. The other love story that struck kind of struck a chord with me was the love of the artist with the art.
Oh.
So the movie opens with the kind of bound cover of a book saying Crimson Peak, right? And then page turns, we have like a little lithographic illustration, and then here we are in New York, right? Or Philadelphia, was it? I can't remember now.
I don't either. I just, I was like, okay, it's, early America.
Early America, yeah. And we see Edith, who has written this this great story, and one of the scenes that most interests me, because we have no idea how earnest Thomas is being, is when her father tells him to thoroughly break her heart, right?
Oh,
Thomas takes Edith, she's going up the stairs after he said that he's going back to England, and he proceeds to rip her book to shreds.
oh my God, that like, we sit here and a couple times a week we create something that we just pray that people are gonna like the idea that somebody would like listen to this and then like come to my house and knock on my door and be like, let me tell you how fucking terrible your podcast is. I like the idea of it just tears me to shreds.
Yeah, and that is, and this is us just having a conversation.
Right.
Imagine pouring yourself into something and the revision and the editing that must go into this. I mean, it's I have started and abandoned I don't know how many novels in my life, so I've never actually finished one. So the fact that she actually finished one, like, God, that's incredible. And he sits here and he tells her all of these, really hurtful things. But is there a hint of truth to it? Right?
Oh.
To me, that's what kind of like there is a light bulb that goes off, right? What is the loss that she suffered in life was her mother, right? So she has experienced loss, but she talks about needing to have a romantic interest put into this, right? And because there wasn't one present. And by the end of this movie, she's had a romantic interest, and there is one present in what we're seeing, right? There's also, she seems to not really have an understanding of ghosts, even though she claims that there are ghosts in this story. And it's not until later on that she understands what ghosts mean to her. She does know that she believes in them, but what does that belief mean, right? People who are religious will tell you often that, they came to God later in life, right? That they rediscovered or were reborn, and they found what that meaning was, right? And I think that's kind of what happened to her, where she discovered at Allerdale Estate, well, this is what a ghost is. That story that I had, right, the one that was being tossed into the furnace, right, into the fireplace,
Right.
That was not the best that I had in me. It might have been the best that I had in me then, but it's not the best that I have in me now. And so at the end of the movie, when we see that there has been a book published, that it is called Crimson Peak, I get the sense that there is this sort of like metafictional thing going on where we have seen the movie play out. We have seen we've seen her story play out. This is her book in film form, and that she persevered, and that despite the criticisms that were levied upon her, despite this crazy ordeal, whether true or not true, she has written this incredible story that has enthralled us all. So that love for her fiction, I mean, and she clearly knows who she wants to be right from the very beginning, right? She's compared by McMichael's mother to who is it, Jane Austen,
Yes.
right at the beginning, and she says, oh, she died a spinster, and she says, well, I like to think of myself not as Jane Austen,
But as Mary Shelley.
but as Mary Shelley, who died a widow. And of course, at the end of the film, she is a widow. So, there's so many things here that to me lead me to believe that this is her story, and that the love that she has, not for anything else or anyone else, but for the story, for the art of writing, right, is above all for her. And as someone who appreciates a good Gothic story, I really appreciate this.
That's a really good, like, I absolutely think you're right in the fact that when we start with the book opening, and then as you watch the credits you see that this is, we're very much, that is why the story for the most part is always presented to us through her eyes. We occasionally get some scenes that's just Thomas and Lucille, but this idea that most of what we're seeing is what's actively happening to her lends itself to that as well.
Yeah. And interestingly, whenever we see Thomas and Lucille, there's no plot given away.
Right. Very true.
The only time that the plot is ever propelled is by Edith, by whatever she discovers or anything like that.
Yep. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yeah, so I think you're right. Where we started with all this, it absolutely works best as a love story, as a romance movie, and it's evidenced by the fact that we just talked all this time about it being, and we never even just talked about the relationship between Edith and Thomas, or Thomas and Lucille. There's those layers. We talked very early on about, as you started to watch this. It's impossible to not peel this movie back as you go, because it's begging for that. It's absolutely just pleading with you to please look at what's happening here. Don't just watch this movie and enjoy it, but explore what you're seeing.
And watch it over again.
Yeah.
This is the kind of movie that I'm already itching to get back into and watch again.
Agreed.
And as with any talk of love, violence must come immediately after.
Of course.
I thought that the violence, the kills in this movie were pretty good. What'd you think of? I mean, because it wasn't gory, but there was a fair share of violence in this, maybe a little more than we usually get in gothic horror movies.
So what we get here is an example of make it count when you're going to do something violent. Like, it was, when it would happen suddenly. It would be stark and frightening, and they didn't have to make it real gory, because just when it happened, it was enough to scare you. And then it was just those moments that, oh yeah, that's right, this movie, like, it is, this is scary and people are dying, and so they did a great job with making it was important. It wasn't ever just a kill because it had been 12 and a half minutes since we'd killed it.
Yeah.
It was every single death, every single injury propelled the story down, and sometimes even the ones that weren't kills, as with Charlie Hunnam gets stabbed twice. Neither of them kill, but they're both so vital to the story, and the fact that they're not death blows is what makes them so vital. The fact that she stabs him under the arm because
right here in the armpit. Oh my God!
She wants to force Thomas to finish the job, and that's when we find out that she's actually the one who killed Edith's dad. And she's the only one who ever gets her hand dirty, so she purposefully delivers a blow that won't kill him to force Thomas to do that, which, counterproductive to what she wanted, drives that wedge even further between them and makes him realize that maybe this isn't necessarily the life he wants. Then the second time that Charlie Hunnam gets stabbed, it's when he tells him, "You're a doctor, where do I stab so you'll live?" And so he stabs him again, but again, it does so much to propel the story in that moment that the fact that he didn't die, and these two stabbings were so huge to the character development of Thomas and of their relationship. It was the last vestige of what was going to be their relationship, was when he decided to go against his sister and maybe realized it wasn't in him to be the one who did the killing, maybe realized that it just wasn't the life he wanted to lead anymore. But so, like those, like, but yeah, you're right. Like that, getting stabbed like in the armpit, like you can feel that, right? And
Yeah.
they're so close on that shot when he shows him how to get like right in there in his ribs, so it won't be, fatal. Like they're all the, the kills, the gore, the stuff like that. It all matters. None of it is something that you feel like might have necessarily been done just for shock value. It's all important to the story, which I think is a refreshing take sometimes. So often when you watch a horror film, it's like somebody just gets killed because, like I said, well, you got to make the audience jump sometimes.
Yeah.
But when they did these things in the movie, it furthered the story, and I think that is something that we don't always get. That is something that's not used as often, and I think that makes the little bit of gore, the killings that we have in this movie, that much more impactful.
I agree. And the other thing that jumps out at me with these kills is how brutal they are. They're not easy. So often in horror, the violence looks effortless.
Yes.
Jason will pick up a machete and just whack and done.
Right.
But this is not that. Like Thomas needs to make it look as if he has just murdered him. He really leans in on that stabbing. When Lucille is killing Edith's father, I mean, there is a brutality there.
Yes.
It's almost as if she's a woman possessed. But when we see the shot from a different angle later in the film, it's quite clear that she's like calm, cool, and collected, before this thing happens. She uses every ounce of energy to make this happen. And she does so when she pushes Edith off the balcony.
Right.
She comes at her with everything she's got, and she pushes her out. The fight at the end of the movie in on the grounds of Crimson Peak is another perfect example. Like, this is really brutal. There's lunging, there's running, they're all out of breath. I mean, this is violence that cannot be avoided, I guess, right? At least not in the eyes of the people who are committing these acts of violence, right? It is for their very survival that this is going on, whether it's Lucille killing Mr. Cushing, or whether it's Edith killing Lucille at the end.
Right. It's they do, and I mean, like when Thomas gets stabbed like in the head, like, that's another one where it's like God, that is like, you tap your head and you feel that, and it's like, that's just skin and bone, like the effort that it would take. But I mean, but it's obvious that it was there was such a rage behind that they did. It looks like it took a lot of effort, but you never go, she couldn't really stab him in the head like that. That's crazy. Like, you're made to come face to face with what being so obsessed with something can do to you, and it's totally believable that this otherworldly like strength can be gained when you see the one possibly, if you look at Lucille, really the two things she's got in the world are Thomas in that house, and at that moment it's all gone. She's lost all of that. And so when you that idea of when you take someone and everything has been taken from them, what is a human being capable of, and stabbing someone through the head, that'll do it.
Yeah. I mean, and it's something that happens in real life,
right?
So not totally unrealistic, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, that scene was brutal. And it for me, what got me was not so much stabbing him with the knife, but him pulling it out. It's like, and the blood starts to trickle down, and then the blood starts coming out of his tear duct. It it was beautiful and sad all at the same time, because is that him crying that his sister, he realizes now what his sister has done to him, for his entire life, really, or is it just the natural response, right, of pulling this knife out that your tear duct would bleed.
Yeah, like
I don't
guess
know.
I didn't
There's
even really think about it as him cry. Like, I mean, obviously it was from his tear duct. I just kind of thought it was like, oh, there's a hole in your face and now blood shooting.
right.
Out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw so much symbolism throughout the movie. At that point, I was like, okay, I got to start looking for shit here, because there's pretty much everywhere you turned, there was something else that you could like pick up and say, oh, okay, let's analyze this. The literary analyst in me was going fucking bonkers last night.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. So I think we agreed that we would do our rating system was going to be incestuous handjobs.
Yes, out of 5.
Out of 5. So, Daniel, out of 5 incestuous handjobs, how many incestuous handjobs do you give this?
So, and this is the part of the podcast that I always kind of dread, right? Because you look, it's even if I had, even when you have issues with something, sometimes we get into talking about it, and you start to peel back so much of the stuff, and I always realize so much when we're doing this, and things that I missed and things that make me like it even more. So as we go through the episode, my idea for my idea for what I'm going to rate it is always changing. I'm not quite ready to give this the 5 full incestuous HJs. There's a couple times when I felt like little things happened here and there that kind of took me out of the moment, or sometimes the scene would be a little bit wonky in a way that didn't seem to flow right. So I thought I had a rating in mind, but after talking now and after that amazing analysis of the love between the family and the house, I'm gonna go 4.5. I'm gonna go 4.5 incestuous hand jobs, because I can really only think of, like I said, just a couple of times where just little, maybe like little pacing things, little things kind of irked me. But I went into this completely blind. I really had no idea what to expect. I was not disappointed. I think that it has lent itself very well to discussion. I think that it lends itself very well to a rewatch or two. And so like I said, I'm only going to take away half. So it's like 4 incestuous HJs and then like 1 where you didn't get to finish. Right. So we'll go 4.5.
You find such a you do it with ease, man. The way you bring those ridiculous ratings into your explanation is fantastic. I also am going to go 4.5. I bounced back and forth on whether to go 5 or not, and what I've come up with is I need more time with the movie.
Right.
So, ask me in a year after I've watched this a couple more times, I might give it 5. Initially, after watching it last night, I thought I was going to go 4. And as I found that I just couldn't get this movie out of my head, and as I tried to consider what these things that I couldn't get out of my head meant more and more, I thought, okay, well, there's clearly more to this.
Right.
I've got to give it a little more. And as I started discovering what these things meant to me in the movie, I was like, okay, well, there certainly is more. So I think that, like The Shining, this needs to be rewatched. I think immediately this is a more complete film than The Shining. It may not be as layered or nuanced as The Shining, but there are definitely similarities there. You can't talk about a haunted house movie without going to The Shining. So I I really like this. I think 4.5 is where it should be. Please don't hate me, Senor de Toro. I'm a huge fan. So please come on our podcast. I think that's right. I think that's where it should be.
Yeah, I did. Like I said, I did the same type of thing. Honestly, I really thought when we got to this point it was going to be 4, but just as you know, you do that so often, right? When you really start, something very similar happened to me when I saw the very first Paranormal Activity movie, which was when I left the theater. I was like, it was all right, and then when I started talking to people about it, I was like, holy shit, like. I really like that, like way more than my initial kind of walk away. And that's what I love doing with this podcast, because it's like you're pointing stuff out and we're getting it out there. And yeah, so I think 4.5 is exactly where it should be.
Awesome. So there you have it. Crimson Peak, 4.5 incestuous hand jobs from the Authority on how many incestuous hand jobs a gothic ghost story should be, Mr. Stabona and myself. So please tune in to our other podcasts. We've got Mount Geekmore, we've got What's Up Bro, we've got Comedy Fitness, we've got Seasons.
Oh, and hang on, I learned there's a certain way we have to do this one last night while doing Geekmore, and we've got Kick Flicks.
Oh, Kick Flicks. All right, we got Kick Flicks.
I was chastised last night as I was on Geekmore with 3 of the 4 cast members of Kick Flicks and mentioned it without doing it like that. So yes, we've got Kick Flicks. Okay,
well, then from now on, they need to when they talk about Shiver, they need to go and Shiver, a horror movie podcast. They have to say it that way. And I'm going to make sure they do that. Otherwise, I will not indulge them in that ludicrous behavior. So I think that's it, right?
Yeah. Make sure you follow all of our social media. If you head to shiverpod.com, it will link you to our Geek Bro website. If there's any podcasts we forgot to mention here, you'll find them there. Not only are they the ones we talked about, there are older ones that we used to do that are still around. I'm not sure if all the episodes are streaming or not. But like I said, if you head to shiverpod.com, that will take you straight to our part. And then from there, that is the gateway to the Geek Bro network, which is located at geekbro.net. Make sure you follow all of our social media at ShiverPod. We're trying to get better about posting a day or two before, once we decide when we're going to record and what movie it's going to be. So we said it's like a book club. Now you can watch it before, then you can come in and you can be part of the conversation. Also, that's where you're going to find out. David and I have odd schedules. My son's playing ball now, so we can't guarantee a day of the week. So if you follow all of our social media, you'll know when we're going to record.
So likely next week we will be doing Conjuring, although likely not. Follow our social media so that you can find out what movie will be replacing The Conjuring next week. Who knows? Maybe we'll do Don't Look Now. Maybe we'll do Evil Dead. The 40th anniversary of Evil Dead's coming up. So I feel like we got to do that. I think it's like the first or second week of October.
Also, we've been talking, we've got some great specifically Halloween themed horror movies that we've got coming down the pike for October as well.
Yes, we do. And September's half over. So
yeah, it really is.
So we gotta get cracking on that. So so bring your candy bags and your masks. Join us in full costume, because we'll be joining in on the festivities.
Absolutely.
So on behalf of everyone here at Shiver, fright you very much.